The smell of antiseptic hits different when it's your own blood you're smelling underneath it. I had been in that ER waiting room for 47 minutes before a nurse finally came out and told me my brother was stable. Stable. Like he was a table that needed leveling. Like stable was a word that meant anything when the guy on the other side of that door was 22 years old, with a crushed collarbone and 4 broken ribs and a jaw wired shut. My brother Owen. The one who still called me every Sunday. The one who sent our mom flowers on her birthday even when he was broke. The one who had never thrown a punch in his life because he thought conflict was a waste of energy. They had a different word for what happened to him. Resisting arrest. The officer at the desk, when I walked up and said I was Owen Calloway's brother and I wanted to know what happened, looked at me the way you look at someone you've already decided doesn't matter. He had that particular kind of stillness that cops sometimes have when they know something you don't, and they're comfortable with that imbalance. Your brother sustained injuries during an altercation with responding officers, he said. His name tag said Bryce. Officer Bryce. He looked like he'd been told once that he had kind eyes and had been coasting on that ever since. What kind of altercation? He was non-compliant during a stop. Non-compliant how? He's 160 pounds. He works at a bookstore. Bryce shrugged. And something about that shrug, the absolute ease of it, the way it cost him nothing, made my stomach go cold in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew that coldness. I'd felt it in 2 tours in Afghanistan, once outside Kandahar, and once in a place I'm still not legally allowed to name. It's the feeling that arrives when a situation stops being manageable and starts being something else entirely. I looked at Bryce's hands. His knuckles were split. Fresh split, not old split. The kind that comes from impact, not from work. I didn't say anything. I thanked him, and I walked back to the waiting room, and I sat down and I called our mother and I told her Owen had been in an accident and that he was going to be okay. And then I sat there for another hour thinking about that shrug. I want to be clear about who I was at that point in my life. I was 31 years old. I had done 8 years in the Army, 2 of them in Special Forces. I had left the service 2 years earlier and gone into private security consulting, which is the polite name for the kind of work I did. I advised corporations and government agencies on threat assessment, infrastructure vulnerability, and what the industry calls gray zone operations, which means I knew things. I knew how to find information. I knew how to build a case. I knew how to move without being seen. But I also knew that walking into a police station angry and grieving and carrying the kind of background I had was exactly the wrong move, because they would find a reason to make it about me. They always do. So I went home. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in San Antonio with a yellow legal pad, and I started writing down everything I remembered about the phone call I'd gotten 3 hours earlier from a bystander, a woman named Clara who'd seen the whole thing outside the parking garage on Commerce Street and had the presence of mind to call Owen's emergency contact number from his wallet. Clara had told me Owen had been walking to his car after his shift. 2 officers approached him. She didn't know why. There was a conversation she couldn't hear, and then one of the officers shoved Owen against the wall of the parking structure, and then it stopped being a conversation. She said Owen didn't fight back. She said he covered his head with his arms. She said the bigger officer kept going even after Owen was on the ground. She said the other officer just watched. I wrote all of this down. I wrote down Bryce's name. I wrote down the badge numbers of the 2 officers who had been listed on Owen's incident report. I'd memorized them from the copy the hospital gave me. Kowalski, badge 1187. Garrett, D, badge 1203. Then I opened my laptop and I went to work. It took me 4 days to build a preliminary profile on both officers. This wasn't hacking. This was open source intelligence work, the kind any competent analyst can do if they know where to look. Public records, court filings, civil suits, HOA disputes, property records, social media. You'd be surprised what people leave visible when they think nobody's paying attention. What I found on Kowalski was a pattern. 3 prior excessive force complaints over 6 years, all dismissed. 1 civil lawsuit settled out of court for $40,000, paid by the city. He drove a truck that cost more than his salary should allow. He owned a bass boat. His girlfriend posted photos on Instagram of a trip to Cancun they'd taken in March. A trip that looked expensive for 2 people on a cop's income. Garrett was cleaner on paper. Younger, only 4 years on the force. But there was one thing. A dismissed complaint from 18 months ago. A college student named Priya Nair who said Garrett had stood and watched while her boyfriend was beaten outside a bar. stood and watched, and then co-signed the report that said the boyfriend had been the aggressor. The same playbook. Watching co-sign, that was Garrett's role. He was the witness who made the story clean. I flew out to San Antonio's east side on day 5 to see Owen for the first time since the hospital. He was at our mother's house. She'd converted the downstairs guest room for him because he couldn't do the stairs yet. He was sitting up in bed with the jaw brace still on and 3 pillows propped behind him, watching a documentary about deep-sea fish on his laptop, which is exactly the kind of thing Owen would do when he was trying not to think about something. He looked up when I came in. I prepared myself. I thought I had, but seeing him like that, the swelling across his cheekbone, the way he held himself like his ribs were made of paper, the small, involuntary wince when he tried to turn his head, I had to stand in the doorway for a few seconds and remind myself that anger without strategy is just noise. "Hey," he said. His voice was wrong, thicker. The wiring made it harder. "Hey," I said. "How are you doing?" He looked at the fish documentary. "I've been better." I sat on the edge of the bed. Our mom had brought in 2 glasses of iced tea and then left us alone, because she knew. She'd always known the difference between when we needed her and when we needed each other. "Clara called me," I said. "The woman who was there." Owen nodded slowly. "She told me what she saw." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They told me if I filed a complaint, they'd add charges. Possession, resisting. They said they'd make sure it stuck." He paused. "I don't have money for a lawyer, man." "I know," I said. "And you know how these things go. You know what happens to guys who—" "I know," I said again. "I'm not asking you to do anything yet." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see him trying to figure out how much of what I was thinking was showing on my face. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Research," I said. Owen was quiet for a long time. One of the deep-sea fish on his screen pulsed with bioluminescent light. "Don't do something stupid," he finally said. "I'm not going to do something stupid," I said. "I'm going to do something thorough." The second thing I found, the one that changed everything, came from a property record search on Kowalski. He had purchased his house in 2019 for $412,000. Standard mortgage? Nothing unusual. But he'd refinanced in late 2021, around the same time as that $40,000 civil settlement, and the refinancing documents included a cosigner, a name I recognized. Alderman Preston Webb. Webb was on the city council. He'd been on it for 11 years. He chaired the Public Safety Committee, which means he oversaw the police department's budget and oversight process, which means he was, functionally, the political ceiling above the police chief. The man who decided whether complaints got investigated and whether investigations went anywhere. And he had co-signed Kowalski's mortgage. I sat with that for a while. Then I started pulling on the thread. Webb's financial disclosures were public record. His campaign finance filings were public record. What you could see in those documents, if you knew what to look at, was a set of donors that overlapped interestingly with 2 commercial real estate development projects on the east side of the city. The exact neighborhoods where Kowalski and Garrett had logged the majority of their use of force incidents over the past 3 years. Small businesses pushed out, properties acquired, redevelopment permits approved at unusual speed through the City Planning Commission. I'm not an economist, but I know a protection racket when I see one. The cops weren't just corrupt in the way that some cops are corrupt. Bad temper, bad training, bad culture. They were assets. They were being used to push people out of neighborhoods that someone wanted cleared. And Alderman Webb was the someone. I called my old unit comms officer, a guy named Trent who had left the army to work in financial forensics. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. He spent a weekend pulling public financial records and sent me a spreadsheet on Monday morning with a note that said, "This is either a coincidence or a felony. Probably a felony." The spreadsheet showed 14 cash deposits into an LLC registered to Kowalski's girlfriend's name over the previous 2 years, totaling $106,000. The LLC had one client, a holding company called Meridian Urban Development. Meridian Urban Development had one beneficial owner, Preston Webb. I printed everything out, I put it in a folder. And then I drove to a law office downtown and sat across from an attorney named Sarah Okafor, who specialized in civil rights litigation and police misconduct. She read through the folder without saying anything. She asked me 2 questions. She read through it again. "This is significant," she said. "I know. If this is accurate, and I'm not saying it is yet, this is not just a misconduct case. This is RICO territory. This is federal. I know, I said. How did you get this? Public records. She looked at me over the top of the folder. She had the kind of eyes that have been lied to a lot and have gotten good at noticing. All of it? Everything in that folder is available to any member of the public with the time and the knowledge to look, I said. I have both. She nodded slowly. I need you to understand that if we move forward, this becomes a legal process, not a personal one. You can't be doing other things on the side. Understood. And your brother has to be willing to participate. His testimony matters. I'll talk to him. I drove back to my mother's house. Owen was in the kitchen now, up and moving, heating soup on the stove. Progress. He moved carefully, like he was testing each step, but he was up. I told him what I'd found. All of it. He didn't say anything for a long time. He stirred his soup. An alderman, he finally said. Yeah, so when I got my jaw broken, it was because some guy in a suit needed a neighborhood cleared. That's what it looks like? Owen set the spoon down. He looked at the wall for a moment, and I could see something shifting in him. Not anger exactly, more like the moment when you stop being surprised and start being decided. Okay, he said. What do we do? The next 2 weeks were quiet on the surface. Underneath, they were not. Sarah filed a federal civil rights complaint which triggered a Department of Justice notification. She also filed a formal request for all body camera footage from the night of Owen's arrest, which the department stonewalled immediately. They claimed the cameras had malfunctioned. Both of them, on the same night, in the same parking garage. That kind of coincidence has a name. It's called consciousness of guilt. I wasn't idle while the legal process moved. I reached out through back channels to a contact at the FBI's San Antonio field office, a woman I'd worked with briefly on a joint task force during my consulting days. I sent her Trent's spreadsheet with a note that said, "Not asking you to do anything, just wanted you to have this." She didn't respond, but 3 days later I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and the man on the other end asked me if I'd be willing to sit for an informal conversation about what I knew. That conversation lasted 4 hours. I want to pause here and tell you what was happening with Kowalski during those 2 weeks, because I was watching. Day 3 after the DOJ notification, his Instagram went private. His girlfriend's Instagram went private. Day 5, the base boat disappeared from the driveway on his property records listing. Probably moved to a storage unit or a friend's property. Day 8, he applied for a transfer to a different precinct. The request was denied, which told me the department was either cooperating with the investigation or trying to control the optics. Day 10, he called in sick for the first time in 2 years. I drove past the precinct that afternoon. Not to do anything. Just to see. His unit was still in the lot, which meant he was inside. I sat in my car across the street and I thought about Owen standing in that parking garage covering his head with his arms. And I thought about how easy it would be to walk across that street and make things very simple and direct. I sat there for about 10 minutes. Then I drove away. Because the thing about being trained the way I was trained is that you understand the difference between what's satisfying and what's effective. Satisfaction is temporary. Effectiveness compounds. The first crack came on day 12. Garrett broke. He came to Sarah's office voluntarily with his own attorney, and he gave a statement. He said he had been present during the assault on Owen Calloway. He said Kowalski had initiated the contact without cause. He said there had been no drugs found on Owen. The report had included planted evidence, a small baggie of marijuana that Kowalski had brought in his jacket pocket. He said he had signed the report because Kowalski had told him that Webb's people protected the officers who kept their mouths shut, and that the ones who topped found themselves in situations that were hard to explain. He said this had been going on for years. He said he was sorry. He looked at the floor when he said it. I wasn't in the room. Sarah told me about it afterward. I asked her if Garrett's apology seemed genuine. He cried, she said. That's not an answer. No, she said. But it's data. The problem was Webb. The financial connection was circumstantial enough that a skilled defense attorney could create doubt. We needed something more direct. Something that put Webb's instructions in Kowalski's hands in a way that couldn't be explained away. That came from an unexpected place. Our mother. She had been quiet through all of this. She'd cooked. She'd driven Owen to follow-up appointments. She'd kept the house calm the way she always had, the way she'd done after our dad left when I was 12. And Owen was 8, and she'd figured out how to hold everything together, alone. She was not a woman who showed her hand, but she'd been doing her own research. She came to me one evening with her phone and showed me a Facebook group for residents of the Riverside Commons development, the neighborhood that had been largely cleared and redeveloped with Meridian urban money. The group was full of people who had been pushed out, and one of them, a retired postal worker named George, had posted something 6 months ago that had only gotten 4 likes and no attention at all. He had a voicemail. He'd saved it on his phone because he found it threatening at the time, but he hadn't known what to do with it, and the police hadn't helped when he tried to report it. The voicemail was from a number registered to a burner, but the voice on it was distinctive. He'd recognized it because he'd seen the man at a city council meeting once. The voice said, very calmly, that George should think carefully about whether he wanted to continue making trouble about his lease dispute, because the neighborhood was changing and it was easier to be part of that change than to be in the way of it. Calm. Deliberate. The voice of someone who had never been told no in a room that mattered. Preston Webb. I sent George a message through the Facebook group that evening. I explained who I was and what we were doing. I asked if he'd be willing to share the voicemail with our attorneys. He called me 20 minutes later. I've been waiting, he said, for somebody to actually do something with this for 6 months. I know, I said. I'm sorry it took this long. Is my family going to be safe? It was the same question Owen had been afraid to ask out loud. The question, underneath every question in situations like this. I thought about what I could promise and what I couldn't. We're going to do this the right way, I said. And we're going to be very loud about doing it so that anything happening to you would be an obvious, stupid mistake that nobody with Webb's resources would make. There was a pause. Okay, George said. Okay, you can have the voicemail. The FBI moved on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there. Nobody called me to tell me it was happening. I found out because Sarah called me at 7:15 a.m. and said simply, turn on the news. The footage from the news helicopter showed federal agents entering Webb's office at City Hall, another team at the precinct. Kowalski was taken into custody at his house, the same house he'd bought with Webb's co-signature, still in his pajamas, from what the news reporter breathlessly described as a pre-dawn operation, which was inaccurate since it was 7:15, but drama has its own logic. I watched the footage on my laptop. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. There's no triumph in seeing a man walked out of his house in handcuffs. It's just the end of a process. The satisfaction, if there is any, is something quieter than triumph. I called Owen. He'd already seen it. I could hear our mother in the background. It's done? He asked. It's started, I said. The criminal process is going to take a while. But, yeah, it's started. He was quiet for a moment. George's voicemail. That's what did it. That and everything else. But yeah, that was the piece. A retired mailman, Owen said. Sometimes the person who saves the case is the one nobody was paying attention to. The preliminary hearings were what you'd expect. Webb's attorney was expensive and theatrical and made 3 separate attempts to get the voicemail evidence suppressed, all of which failed. Kowalski's attorney pivoted to a cooperation agreement almost immediately. Kowalski was, in the end, the kind of man who did what he did because someone told him to, and because it was easier than not doing it, which made him a useful witness against the person who had told him to. Garrett's cooperation had already sealed a significant portion of the case. Between the two of them, and Trent's financial analysis and George's voicemail, and the body camera falsification evidence, which the FBI's digital forensics team found on a server the department had claimed was wiped, Webb's attorneys started using the phrase accepting responsibility in their press statements, which is what attorneys say when they're negotiating on sentencing. I testified in the civil case. I was on the stand for 2.5 hours. The defense attorney tried twice to make the story about me, about my background, my methods, whether I had crossed any legal lines in gathering information. Sarah had prepared me for this. She had told me to answer exactly what was asked and nothing more, and to remember that accuracy is a kind of armor. Did you ever conduct illegal surveillance on any of the defendants? The defense attorney asked. No, I said. Did you access any private information through unauthorized means? No. How did you obtain the financial records you turned over to federal investigators? Public filings, I said. Campaign finance disclosures, property records, LLC registrations, civil court documents. All of it is available to any citizen who knows how to search. And you just happen to know how to search? Yes, I said. I did. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. When we walked out of the courthouse, there were cameras. There were always cameras by that point. The story had gotten national attention, not just because of what had happened to Owen, but because of what Kowalski's cooperation had revealed. 11 other incidents in those two neighborhoods over 3 years, 11 other people who had filed complaints that Webb had buried, 11 other cases that the Civil Rights Unit at the DOJ was now reviewing. A reporter stuck a microphone in my face and asked how I felt. I thought about Owen in the guest room watching deep-sea fish. I thought about George waiting 6 months with a voicemail nobody would listen to. I thought about the woman at the parking garage, Clara, who had trusted that calling a stranger's emergency contact number would actually mean something. Relieved, I said, and aware that this shouldn't have required what it required. The reporter wanted more. They always want more. What do you mean by that? I mean, my brother is alive and we got a good outcome. And I'm sitting here knowing that if I didn't have the background I have, if I didn't know how to navigate these systems, he would have been in debt to a public defender and carrying a drug possession charge, and Kowalski would be on his boat in the Gulf. I paused. Justice worked this time, but justice shouldn't be a resource that only people with resources can access. That's not justice. That's just luck dressed up in the right clothes. The reporter nodded. I walked past her to where Owen was standing with our mother on the courthouse steps. He was standing straight. The jaw was fully healed by then. The ribs ate weeks behind him. He looked like himself again, or close to it. There's always something that stays changed. Some new caution in the eyes. Some knowledge that can't be unknown. Our mother hugged me first, then stepped back and looked at my face the way she's always looked at my face, like she's reading something written in a language she taught me herself. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." Owen put his hand on my shoulder briefly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We had lunch at a Vietnamese place on the Riverwalk that Owen had been talking about for 2 months. We sat outside because the weather had turned cool and clear, and San Antonio on a cool, clear October afternoon is genuinely beautiful. We ate pho and talked about nothing important. Our mother told a story about her neighbor's dog. Owen talked about a book he was recommending at work. Normal life reasserting itself around the edges of everything that had happened. At some point, without planning to, I said, "I keep thinking about what Garrett said, about why he signed the report." Owen looked at me over his bowl. "He said the people who talked found themselves in situations," I said. "He was 26 years old, and he saw what Kowalski was doing, and he co-signed because he was afraid." "He still did it," Owen said. "Yeah, he did." We were quiet for a moment. "I'm not forgiving him," Owen said. It wasn't angry. It was just a fact he was reporting. I don't know if I ever will, but I understand how someone ends up there. In that space where doing the wrong thing is easier than doing the right thing, and you can convince yourself the consequences are someone else's problem. He looked at his food. I just wish he'd found a way to be braver. I thought about that for a long time afterward. 3 months later, I started a nonprofit. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was practical. I knew how to gather intelligence. I knew how to build cases. And I knew that there were people all over the country sitting with voicemails and dashcam videos and witness statements that were going nowhere because they didn't know who to call. The organization, I named it Common Ground Legal Initiative, which is deliberately unglamorous because I didn't want the name to be the point, connects people who have experienced police misconduct with investigators and attorneys who can assess their cases and, where the evidence supports it, pursue them. In the first year, we took on 19 cases in 6 states. We won 11. 4 are still in process. 4 were cases where the evidence didn't support the claims, and we told those clients that clearly and helped them understand why. I tell you this not to make myself sound good. I tell you because of something Owen said to me at the ribbon cutting for our small office on the east side of San Antonio, in the same neighborhood where Riverside Commons used to be, where a pocket park with a mural of old neighborhood photographs now sits where a row of displaced businesses used to be. He said, "You know what changed everything, George? Not you, George. Not you." George had the voicemail, I said, and he had the patience to hold on to it, and nobody listened to him for 6 months. No, nobody did. Owen looked at the mural. There were faces in it, real people from the neighborhood, painted large and specific and human. An older woman holding vegetables from a garden, a man in a barber's apron, a kid on a bike. So the work, Owen said, is making it so people don't have to wait 6 months. Or ever. Yeah, I said. That's the work. He's doing well now. He still works at the bookstore. He loves it. He's not going anywhere. And he took up cycling during his recovery and has kept it up, which I give him a hard time about because he's become one of those people who talks about cycling. He still calls every Sunday. Kowalski is serving 4 years in a federal facility in Beaumont, Texas. reduced for cooperation, which is the deal that was offered and I had no say in and have made my peace with. Garrett is on supervised probation for 3 years and was barred from law enforcement permanently, which I think is the right outcome. He was never a bad person, he was a coward, and the law handled the distinction reasonably well. Webb is serving 9 years. His development company was dissolved. The properties that Meridian Urban had acquired in the Riverside Commons area were subject to litigation that resulted in a settlement fund that went to displaced residents. 11 of them. George got enough to buy into a small property of his own a few miles east. He sent me a card. It said, "Thank you for listening. I have it on my desk." I think about the moment in my car across from that precinct sometimes. The 10 minutes I sat there. I think about what I chose to do instead of what the angrier part of me wanted to do. I don't think I'm the better person than someone who would have made a different choice in that moment. I just had a different set of tools available, and I knew from training and from experience that the ones I used would reach further. The thing that stays with me isn't the verdict. It isn't Webb in handcuffs, or Kowalski's cooperation agreement, or the 19 cases or any of it. It's Owen in our mother's kitchen, stirring soup with a wired jaw, saying okay like it was a decision he was making about who he was going to be from that point forward. He could have stopped there. A lot of people do. You survive something like that and you close around it and you spend years just trying to keep it from spreading. He didn't do that. He showed up. He testified. He sat in a courtroom and looked at the men who had hurt him and told a jury what had happened in plain, exact language, and then he walked out into the sunlight and got lunch and kept going. If you ask me what I'm most proud of from any of this, it's not anything I did. It's watching my brother decide he wasn't done yet. If this story resonated with you, if you've seen something like this in your own community, or if you know someone who has, I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what you think should happen to officers like Kowalski and Garrett. And I'll ask you the same thing I've been asking myself for 3 years now if you were in Garrett's position. Young, afraid, watching something wrong happen right in front of you. What do you think you would have done? I don't think it's an easy question. I think that's exactly why it's worth asking. Subscribe if you want to hear more cases like this. We're just getting started. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in any cosmic sense. I'm not someone who believes the universe is keeping score, but I do believe that systems have logic, and when you understand the logic of a system, you can either work inside it or you can dismantle it. And the choice you make says everything about what kind of person you actually are under pressure. Kowalski didn't end up in a federal facility in Beaumont because he was unlucky. He ended up there because every decision he made, from the first time he co-signed a false report to the night he put his hands on my brother in that parking garage, was a brick in a structure that could only hold so much weight before it came down. He thought the structure was permanent because nobody had ever pushed on it hard enough. That's not strength. That's just an untested assumption. Webb is the more interesting case to me. He was intelligent. He was patient. He built something over 11 years that genuinely looked legitimate from the outside. But the thing about corruption that operates through intimidation is that it requires the silence of everyone it touches. And silence is only reliable until it isn't. George had a voicemail on his phone for 6 months. 6 months of silence, and then one message from a stranger, and the whole architecture started cracking. Webb's 11 years came apart because a retired postal worker decided his experience was worth documenting, even when nobody was listening yet. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what I did. What George did. He held on to something true in a moment when holding on to it cost him peace, cost him certainty, cost him the comfort of just moving on and forgetting. He stayed honest with himself about what he had witnessed and what it meant. That's not a small thing. Most people, faced with indifference from every institution they tried to report to, would have deleted the voicemail and tried to let it go. George didn't. That's character operating without any guarantee of reward, which is the only real test of character there is. Owen showed me something similar. He sat in that witness stand and he told the truth about what happened to him in plain, specific language, without dramatizing it and without minimizing it. He was afraid. Anyone would have been afraid. But he did it anyway. And he did it with a kind of dignity that I know cost him something privately, because I know my brother, and I know how much he hates being defined by something that was done to him against his will. He testified because it was right, not because it was easy. I think about the 10 minutes I spent parked across from that precinct. I think about what I almost let myself become in that moment. Not a man with a strategy, but a man with a grievance and the skills to act on it violently. The thing that stopped me wasn't fear of consequences. It was clarity about what I actually wanted. I wanted Owen safe. I wanted the people who hurt him to face real accountability. I wanted something to change so that the next George, the next Owen, the next person sitting in an ER waiting room being told their family member had a clumsy accident, I wanted that person to have somewhere to turn. None of that was achievable through 10 minutes of anger in a parking lot. The work that actually mattered required discipline and patience and honesty, the willingness to build something solid enough to withstand scrutiny, to document rather than react, to move toward the truth rather than toward the feeling of power. That's the only version of strength that compounds over time. Everything else is just noise that eventually runs out of energy. I'm still doing the work. It's slower and less dramatic than what happened with Owen's case, and that's how it should be. The cases we take on at Common Ground are rarely clean. They're complicated and they're expensive and they're exhausting, and sometimes the evidence isn't there and we have to tell someone that and watch their face when we do. That's the part nobody makes videos about. But sometimes the evidence is there. Sometimes George has a voicemail, and on those days, it's enough.